shines a light on Jumbo the elephant. Whilst Jumbo the elephant has all but passed out of living memory, his death closing in on a century and a half ago, yet at the same time there was little else that could rival the celebrity and spectacle of Jumbo the elephant, the first animal superstar. A rudimentary piece of salesmanship and schlock it no doubt was, yet true all the same. Never before had an elephant nor any other animal captured the hearts of not only a nation but the world in general. Realistically speaking, nothing has been his equal since. Yet beneath the ceremony and fanfare our species is prone to, the birth of photography around the time of Jumbo's unfortunate rise to prominence forever etched in history, helping to crystallize and capture his majesty for all. Though burdened by his surroundings and tragic circumstances, this did little to dissuade his adoring public from falling for this most magnificent of beasts. Knowing little of the needs of these animals, though one could reasonably assume they weren't being met, such as they were, if that were true, what excuse do we have now, still doing the same to his forebears today? Jumbo was likely born in 1861 in French Sudan and undoubtedly witnessed the death of his mother at an early age whilst totally dependent on her. The tribesmen living on the Sudanese plains at the time responding to the desire for elephants to pique the interest and fuel the apathy of the westernized world, clamouring for a peek into the savage and uncharted jungles of Africa and elsewhere. What better way to showcase man's dominance over beast than with the largest land creature on earth, an African bull elephant? The cruel and primitive capture methods utilised at the time involved the tribesmen locating a mother and young calf. They would then chase the elephants into exhaustion, the mother likely slowed down by the inexperienced and clumsy gait of her calf, at which point the mother would be repeatedly speared until either incapacitated or dead, and her calf would be taken. The traumatic imprint that is left upon these animals after witnessing such barbarism and the loss of their mother is repeatedly observed in orphan elephants today. It is a long process back to health and happiness, as best as can be attained in elephant sanctuaries who take in orphaned elephant calves. At this time, however, there was little understanding as to the psychology or the needs of elephants. So Jumbo was left flailing on the emotional wind, drifting aimless and alone. This horrific event would be a significant point of contention as to the reason for Jumbo's wild mood swings, which would come upon him at night in the years to come as he would throw his body against the walls of his prison at night, breaking thick timber poles like matchsticks and snapping off his tusks. When they did regrow, he would grind them down on the stone walls encasing him, a common behaviour for captive elephants. There are those who have pointed to a more tangible cause to Jumbo's fits of rage, though whose emotional turmoil doesn't seem all the darker at night, when there is not the pitiful distraction of the array of humans who would meander through his life on a daily basis. There has been some contention that Jumbo was captured not in Sudan, but in neighbouring Eritrea. Though as Jumbo was sold to a French zoo, the Jardin des Plantes, or Garden of Plants, in Paris, and Sudan was a French colony at the time, whereas Eritrea was an Italian colony. It is thus far more likely that he was captured in Sudan. Jumbo was then sold to London Zoo in 1865. Despite the common image of Jumbo as an imposing and surly figure, Jumbo was quite small when he arrived in London, and stood beneath the height of the average man. Jumbo, whose name appears to be a combination of the Swahili words Jumbo, which means hello, and Jumbe, which means chief, when first seen by the man who would go on to be his keeper and lifelong companion, Matthew Scott, was described as being quite sick and sorry. Scott appeared to fall for the charms of little Jumbo, and the pair were reported to have formed a bond within hours, a bond that would endure for the remainder of Jumbo's life. Scott himself was no elephant expert, but neither could anyone else themselves claim to be. Although Scott, having no wife or family, and reportedly a less than friendly fellow, seemed to have found a kindred spirit in the orphaned animal. In the various incarnations of Jumbo's story, Scott has come in for heavy criticism for any number of reasons, some of which, when viewed with the gift of hindsight and a century of knowledge, could easily darken anyone's impression of the man. Yet for all the faults of his character and his fumbling attempts at elephant husbandry and business acumen, it would be hard to ignore the fact that the man surely held Jumbo with the highest of affection. This itself is no great feat of humanity, for how could anyone not live beside so resplendent a being without falling for it? If a crudely modern comparison can be drawn, maybe you could liken him to a Hollywood parent precociously pushing their child towards stardom, whilst basking in their reflective glory themselves. Deep down they clearly love their child, but the spotlight can be a dizzying and despotic place to be at the best of times. Jumbo had arrived in poor health, although appeared much healthier, and certainly much bigger, a short time later. Jumbo began providing rides to paying customers by the age of 6, at a cost of 2p for a ride, with Scott pocketing the money. Visitors could also pay 2p for a currant bun to feed to Jumbo, to which he was plied with constantly throughout the day, just as a gregarious pet owner lovingly overfeeds their dog to the point of obesity. Whilst Jumbo was never observed to have been overweight, currant buns are certainly not standard elephant fare, and his dentistry, which was examined recently, pointed to dietary issues likely being the cause of significant tooth pain, of which the only relief would have been the whiskey and beer that Scott would give to Jumbo to calm him down as his night terrors took hold. Scott, having a penchant for the drink himself, would often sit alone with Jumbo at night in his pen, the two of them drinking together. Nor was it uncommon for Jumbo to drink an entire barrel of ale. When the liquor failed to work, in the words of Abraham Bartlett, the superintendent of London Zoo, during Jumbo's tenure, he and Scott would grab him by both ears and administer to him a good thrashing, at which point Jumbo would usually lie down and cry in submission. Though Bartlett, who had begun to express concern over Jumbo's mood swings, despite his exemplary behaviour during the day, whilst interacting with the public, had decided to buy a gun on the chance that Jumbo need be shot. Visiting dignitaries would ride Jumbo as a matter of course, with the young President Theodore Roosevelt and Winston Churchill having ridden Jumbo. It was also reported that Queen Victoria and her children would come to the zoo in secret after hours and ride Jumbo themselves. If only Jumbo had the foresight to throw them from his back and trample them all, how much better off the world would have been without them. Musth is essentially the elephant equivalent of adolescence. When male elephants receive incredible doses of testosterone, up to 60 times that which they would normally possess. In the wild, a male elephant would normally go through this process in their 20s, although with captive elephants, the process begins much sooner, with the elephant often dripping a continuous stream of pungent urine, which is essentially perfume to the ladies and a warning signal to nearby males. By the age of 16, Jumbo was beginning to show signs of musth, which caused Bartlett even greater concern. Then an answer to Bartlett's prayers arrived in the form of a telegram from America. P.T. Barnum, owner and curator of the so-called greatest show on earth, was searching far and wide for an African elephant to add to his troupe of 21 Asian elephants and his travelling circus. He inquired as to the lowest sum for which they would consider selling Jumbo. Barnum could not believe his luck when the reply came that London Zoo would accept £2,000 for the sale of Jumbo. This figure, which some claim was extraordinarily high, about £150,000 in today's money, as well as claims of it being a virtual steal for Barnum, who in truth would recoup the money he had spent during the first 3 weeks that Jumbo was in America. There was also credence given that the search for an elephant on Barnum's behalf was little more than a publicity stunt, something for which Barnum was commonly guilty of, such as his desire to buy the birthplace of Shakespeare and ship the entire building across the pond brick by brick to be built in his home of Stratford, Connecticut. Of course, despite claims to the contrary, this was no publicity stunt, and Barnum had come to within a hair's breadth of doing so, had his plan not been discovered at the last minute, upon which a trust was formed to buy the building and keep it in England. Barnum was eccentric for sure. Much has been made of the reasons for Bartlett's decision to sell Jumbo, with the generally accepted theory that his moods became too much of a risk around the public, and that someone was likely to be killed. Another theory that seldom gets a mention is that, along with the aforementioned aspects of muths, elephants will frequently and for prolonged periods get a little bit excited downstairs, and at 4 feet long, that's an awful lot of excitement. Too much, in fact, for the puritanical and conservatively minded British public to bear, it seems. So Jumbo was sold, not only because he was a bit of a roustabout and a loose cannon, but also because of his giant willy. Agreeing that Jumbo, nor any other animal, should ever be confined to the zoo, barren and boring, exploitative and uneducational prisons as they are, this would have been the exact reason why I refused to sell him to Barnum. The idea of British women in their frilly dresses and pristine petticoats, without the temerity to even show the merest hint of skin, getting all flustered and offended at the sight of some elephant wang, as their husbands attempt to avert their eyes and shuffle them off home lest they get any ideas, to be a fly on the wall in that hypothetical scenario. A fact for which the ever-exaggerating, or the oft knowingly fraudulent claims of Barnum was wont to stress. Jumbo measured in at 3.22 metres. Jumbo was advertised as the largest elephant on Earth, a fact for which the ever-exaggerating, or the oft-knowingly fraudulent claims of Barnum was wont to stress, and weighed over 6 tons. Whilst he was certainly above average in height for an elephant, elephants continued to grow into their 40s, and Jumbo at 21 at the time of his sale may well have gone on to reach the impressive 3.99 metres that Barnum repeatedly claimed. Jingo, the elephant that would sadly replace Jumbo at London Zoo, was actually 2 inches taller than Jumbo. The people of London, as well as figures of note at the time, were up in arms when news reached them of Jumbo's sale. 100,000 schoolchildren wrote to Queen Victoria to express their distress at Jumbo's sale and desire to keep him at the zoo. Crowds totalling 20,000 people daily protested around the zoo at the height of his departure, as well as a court case being heard in an attempt to stop the sale on legal grounds, as well as threats made on Barnum's life should he not dissolve the sale. None of the tactics, however well-intentioned, had the desired effect, although there was to be one further stumbling block preventing Jumbo from his relocation. As the crowds amassed on the day Jumbo was to be placed inside his travelling crate, a small and pitiful box if ever there was one, to which it would seem Jumbo was of a similar opinion and refused to comply. Chains had been attached around various parts of his body, and the strongest men the zoo could muster were assembled as a tug-of-war team to pull the persistent pachyderm into the crate. Jumbo was having none of it, and eventually sat down on his belly, at which point the tug-of-war team, realising the futility of their task, downed the chain and went home. Jumbo would remain uncrated for the following fortnight as suspicions began to grow as to the true reason why Jumbo was standing, or rather, lying firm. Bartlett and Barnum became of the opinion that Scott, who at this time was not a part of Barnum's plans for Jumbo, was secretly signalling to the elephant in some way not to enter the crate. As soon as Barnum agreed to take Scott on as Jumbo's keeper, Jumbo was miraculously inside the crate a short time later. And so on the 22nd of March at 2 a.m, in order to prevent protesters from blocking the streets on their way to the docks, Jumbo in his crate, pulled by 10 dray horses, commenced his 3-hour journey to the docks. Jumbo was then loaded onto the ship, the Assyrian Merchant, and began his 2-week journey to America, as thousands of well-wishers lined the banks of the Thames to cheer him on to his new home. As you can well imagine, spending 2 weeks in a cramped and pitiful cage, constantly toing and froing across the waves as it laboriously made its way across the Atlantic, was horrendously cruel, not to mention possibly reinstilling Jumbo's memory of his mother's death, his capture, and his journey to France. During the 14 days at sea, Jumbo bellowed and trumpeted constantly, except for when Scott would ply him with further beer and whiskey, not to mention the chewing tobacco with which he had now become accustomed. Not only this, but the passengers from first class would routinely call on him, feeding him canapes and champagne. Though on April 9th, 1882, as the 2-week journey drew to a close and New York loomed as a speck on the horizon, drawing closer with every additional hour, Barnum, excited to first lay eyes on his new ward, hired a boat to take him out to the Assyrian Merchant. Upon seeing him, Barnum declared Jumbo the greatest elephant who ever lived. 10,000 New Yorkers eagerly awaited his arrival on the docks as well, reportedly the city's largest public gathering at the time. It should also be mentioned that the oft-reported behavioural issues of Jumbo were no longer witnessed after his arrival. Whilst it is pure speculation as to the reason for this, the most likely theory is that as Jumbo now had the company of over 20 elephants, the company of his own species that was denied to him during his time in London was no longer an issue. It should also be mentioned that the oft-reported behavioural issues of Jumbo were no longer witnessed after his arrival. Whilst it is pure speculation as to the reason for this, the most likely theory is that as Jumbo now had the company of over 20 elephants, the company that was denied to him during his time in London, he was able to interact socially with other elephants for the first time since his capture as a young calf. Jumbo's fame and public adoration continued in America, with Barnum quick to capitalise on the marketability of Jumbo, whose image and moniker would go on to grace such random products as suspenders and laxatives. Barnum, never one to pass up the opportunity for public spectacle, not to mention the further monetisation of his elephants, quickly agreed to the idea of his entire elephant herd, led by Jumbo, walking across the Brooklyn Bridge after questions of its safety arose and the public's confidence in the bridge was disappearing after an incident resulting in the deaths of 12 people. It would have been quite a spectacle, 23 pachyderms parading across one of America's most iconic suspension bridges. The event epitomised Barnum in every way. Jumbo continued to travel across the country by rail with Scott by his side. The circus was well received wherever it went, with Jumbo unquestionably being the main attraction. though things behind the scenes were reportedly not so rosy for Barnum, nor indeed for Jumbo. In 1883, Barnum's propensity for the eccentric and extravagant had reportedly left his finances a little thin. Not only this, but in late 1883, Jumbo began to suffer from a mysterious wasting disease and was losing weight despite his apparently healthy appetite. He was also said to be struggling to lie down. Barnum had also come under fire from the American Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals for the elephant trainer's use of spikes. Good to see the welfareist organisations were on point well over a century ago, and we still have animals in circuses the best part of a century and a half later. Money well spent, it seems. Nonetheless, they were proving to be a thorn in Barnum's side. Then a peculiar thing which has served to fuel the conspiratorial fires since Jumbo's death. Henry Ward, a taxidermist and acquaintance of Barnum's, wrote to him in the weeks before Jumbo's death in September of 1885, stating his desire to stuff Jumbo. Ward made reference of Scott's claims that Jumbo was ill. Did Barnum, in an effort to avoid the scandal of Jumbo's death through illness, with which the ASPCA would have had a field day, not to mention the public's collective outrage at the loss of Jumbo, plot the demise of his star elephant? The circus was in St. Thomas, Ontario in Canada, St. Thomas being a significant destination in the rail network at the time, with routes stretching to all areas of the country. The day's shows were over and circus staff were packing away the equipment onto the train carriages in anticipation of another destination elsewhere. All of the elephants had been safely led across the tracks and into their awaiting carriages. Jumbo and a small elephant named Tom Thumb, seemingly named after a performer in Barnum's freak show due to the gentleman's diminutive stature, were the last to cross the tracks. Seemingly from nowhere, a large locomotive came hurtling down the line, striking Jumbo, causing his death. There are claims that say Jumbo was killed instantly, although hindsight and circumstantial evidence would seem to indicate that Jumbo expired soon afterwards, with Scott bellowing and sobbing by his side as his only true friend slipped away. Barnum, either with the intentional knowledge of the event or seizing upon such a grand opportunity, made the claim that Jumbo had rushed onto the tracks in an effort to save the younger and oblivious Tom Thumb from a certain death at the hands of the speeding train. Although current evidence shows that this is almost certainly not the case, it helped to cement Jumbo's legacy and go on to provide a veritable list of spectators and mourners as Jumbo's body, which was also enlarged during taxidermy, was shipped around the country for some 4 years, attracting significant crowds wherever he went. It was also claimed by more modern researchers that Jumbo was struck head-on, resulting in his tusk being pushed back into his brain and killing him instantly. However, observations of Jumbo's skeletal remains does not support this theory, although there does not appear to be any other indication of obvious significant trauma, the like of which one would expect from a significant blow by a train. A photograph only recently coming to light, showing a deceased Jumbo lying on his side in a ditch near the train tracks, showing some rake marks on his right rear flank, which would appear to be the point of contact between the train and himself. His skeletal remains showing no obvious signs of damage at this point either, leading further weight to the idea that the force of the blow resulted in internal injury, with Jumbo expiring soon after. The little elephant Tom Thumb reportedly suffered a broken leg, though little evidence survives as to his treatment and quality of life after the injury. Of course, there is always the possibility that the accident was just that, an accident. For should the event have been stage managed to result in Jumbo's death, it surely could have only been done with the direct involvement of Matthew Scott. Most would dismiss this out of hand for this very reason. Scott's affection for Jumbo was obvious, and surely would never have agreed to any such plan. Although Scott well knew that Jumbo was ill, might he have grudgingly agreed to allow his friend to slip away quickly, rather than continue to be exploited and suffer further, allowing his employer the opportunity to once again financially benefit from Jumbo? Of course, whilst the train was moving briskly, it was able to be spotted a reasonable distance away, not to mention how loud it was. Even if Jumbo was in the middle of the tracks at the time, it would have seemingly taken little intervention to remove him from harm's way before the train struck him. The full truth of the matter may never be known. What is known, however, is what happened next. An inconsolable Scott stayed with Jumbo all evening and viciously fought off trophy hunters, out to seize a souvenir for themselves, or to sell one on and make a buck for themselves off of Jumbo. Pieces of his ears, toes and hide were taken when they overran Scott, unable to fight them all off. It took 200 workers with ropes to pull the stiffened body of Jumbo off of the tracks where he lay. In 1889, after 4 years of unceremonious public display, Barnum donated Jumbo's body to Tufts College, who made the elephant the college mascot, where he resided in the Phineas Barnum Hall, until a fire destroyed the hall, and most of Jumbo in 1970. Apart from his skeleton, which currently resides in the Natural History Museum in New York, all that survived the fire was a small section of Jumbo's tail and a small selection of his ashes, which continue to reside in the peanut butter jar they were placed in after the fire, seemingly the only container on hand at the time. Items found inside Jumbo after his death include coins, keys, a rivet, a human tooth, a policeman's whistle, and a small metal pig statue. Scott spent the following years in Bridgeport, Massachusetts, the location where the circus wintered when not on tour. Barnum provided Scott with a small pension, although this ended with Barnum's death in 1891. Scott reportedly fell into a sad life of depression, despair, and alcoholism, and was reported to often sit alone, talking to his departed elephant friend. He died a few years after Barnum, penniless, destitute and grief-stricken, in a local almshouse, which is simple, charitable accommodation provided to those of little or no means. Could culpability in Jumbo's death be ascertained from his actions? A lonely, downtrodden figure, lamenting his friend's departure and the part he played. Of course, his actions are no true indication of his innocence, or lack thereof. Equally paralysing his grief may have been, should he have had no part or knowledge in the proceedings leading to Jumbo's demise. It is hard not to feel sorry for Scott, robbed of his companion, who in truth was never his to have in the first place. It is a fitting testimony to the misplaced warmth and desire of humans in their continual pursuit of dominion over the animal kingdom, whether coerced or reciprocal, the bond between a man and elephant not natural or normal, but no less wondrous for it. Although Jumbo's legacy may have been all but forgotten, it continued to live on after his death in various forms. The name of the original animal superstar and his bittersweet, admittedly far more bitter than sweet, tale, being a byword for anything large, with everything from jets to food products labelled according to his moniker. A musical bearing the elephant's name ran from the mid to late 30s, followed by a movie adaptation in the early 60s, although the focus was more on the circus and the characters whom filled its ranks than Jumbo himself. The Disney classic Dumbo's namesake character an effigy, a tribute, or a less than camouflaged cash-in on the notoriety of Jumbo, not to mention his cruel and unfortunate life afforded him at the hands of the circus and the zoos beforehand. The lovable flying elephant liberated through the recognition of his special ability. One wonders, what would it have taken for Jumbo to have achieved the liberation he so clearly desired, despite the placation he may have received in the company of elephants he found in America? Those distant memories of Africa and a maternal bond crudely snatched away from him to be replaced by cudgels and spikes and a caring yet troubled human companion. Yet one cannot deny the primitive call of freedom that no doubt echoed within his mind in times of desolation and despair, the insatiable yearning for a life he would never receive, troubling memories so fleeting yet never leaving entirely. Such oaths of stewardship and respect our species continue to break as we offer up more and more animals to the exploitative industries for our amusement and profit. It seems we are still yet to learn the lessons Jumbo so sorely wished to teach us. Perhaps one day soon he and so many other enslaved elephants will see their modern peers live the lives they were wrongly denied. Until then, their proud and majestic trumpeting will continue to decline from savannas and forests worldwide, as they pace around concrete pens in chains or in artificial domains of scarcity and minuscule expanse, as we march them on, spiritually bankrupt and despotic, towards enslavement and extinction.
Did they beat the drum slowly? Did they play the fife lowly? Did they sound the death march as they lowered you down? Did the band play the last post and chorus? Did the pipes play the flowers of the forest?